Hey, and welcome back, everybody, to Educational Triage. This is Tony, and of course, we have the fabulous Philip with us.
Aloha. That's a cool alliteration.
This week, we are looking at the topic of, are we adequately preparing teachers for alternative educational settings? So, Philip, please, if you could, remind us about what is the importance of alternative education, and maybe you can touch on why there's a growing interest in non-traditional approaches to learning.
Well, Tony,
Yes,
there's
sir.
very important things about alternative ed that we need to know. It's alternative,
What does that
which
mean?
means that there is a straight, or not straight, wow, that's terrible, mainstream, the straight line sort of schedule high school thing that was traditionally thought of as the educational system and middle schools and elementary schools as well. But over the years, we have found out that not all the kids can be educated to their fullest potential in those settings alone. So we need to create alternative settings for learning. And when we did that, we came up with alternative methods of teaching as well.
Okay.
And that is a system that's very important for, I'd say, a whole lot more kids that are accommodated by it.
That's true with the more programs that we have.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of them now, but there didn't. Gosh, I don't think there's near enough, but that maybe lead on to other questions or answers.
Actually, to be honest, there were more programs back in the 90s
That makes
than
sense.
there are now.
That makes sense. I was looking at some of the data and I was really, yeah, okay. I didn't put that together nationally. It makes total sense. Yeah, that's
Yeah. And if you want to talk about the origins of alternative ed, I think it's always been there. I think Socrates was, when he taught his students, that was one form.
it's more perceptual. We set it up to be there's the way to do it, and then there's an alternative way.
Mm-hmm. It's education outside the box. How's that?
Definitely outside of that big box with the gym and the football field and all that. Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Okay, so let's define alternative education in different forms. So before we go into some of the predominant, call it philosophies, pedagogies, formations, what have you, let's take a look at some of the attributes that alternative education actually has, if it were. So, for example, you might have an emphasis on individual development because it's student centered. It's about working with each child. It's about having an individual learning plan for each student, setting up those goals, knowing how they're going to be doing.
Making it relevant. There's
Exactly.
an incredible amount of effort put into making lessons relevant.
Hmm. And
Not just, yeah,
fostering self-confidence in the student, and just allowing them to do what it is that they need to do for themselves, and giving them the control and the power.
there's a different role. And that role is challenged by both the adults and the kids within the system because when you get to a high school setting, a lot of the kids are used to that middle school, elementary role where the teacher's king. From
Mhm.
elementary, Mr. or Ms. or Mrs. So and so runs our class, and that's who we follow. And if she tells me or he tells me to do it, we do it. And the principal, in the elementary school is, he's the head guy or head woman, and then you get to middle school, and it's more sort of the teachers are profs, but they're sort of authoritative in a way, but they're authoritarian in a way. And you get to high school, and the alternative setting hits, and a lot of kids will rebel against that, if they're given that control. So it's kind of a challenge sometimes to work with kids, giving them the control and having them accept it.
I think maybe it has something to do with setting the boundaries,
Yeah, that's the field on which you
because if
play.
you give me that kind of power, because
Yeah,
with great power comes great responsibility, right?
that's the
So
point.
you have the power over your education, but you also have responsibility that goes with it. But you have to explain that responsibility. You have and they have to learn it. And so they challenge it to figure out just how far they can go. So they test the boundaries just like a kid would
That too. Yes.
with their
Yeah.
parents when they're 2, 3, 4, all the way up until their 90s. So, but it prioritizes the learner, and you also, with the student centered approach, you encourage active participation. And so sometimes students that enter into alternative ed don't have the self confidence. They may have a lot of angst,
Yep.
and they may not be able to feel comfortable in that setting. So you allow them to start doing that, but you also have to encourage them to have the self motivation in order to go.
Yeah, that's what makes alternative ed tick. You can't do that in a classroom of 22 kids, 5 to 6 periods a day. You can get to a few of them. That's why a lot of those teachers do clubs and coaching, because that's where they get their small environment one on
Mhm.
one teaching fix, really. And I got it every day. I had kids I knew so well. And like I said, it's a process to get them to take control, then, reel them back if they went too far. And yeah, it's so much better to
Yeah.
mentor and teach than it is. And I think alternative ed, there's an awful lot of mentoring as a way. The relationships get a lot closer than just Mr. and Ms. third period.
Yeah. I mean, you might teach a mini lesson or something, but you're mentoring and facilitating, you're guiding,
Yeah.
you are checking in, because maybe a student is so focused on trying to see what they can do. And then all of a sudden you appear and you say, "Hey, let me help." The kid doesn't want your help. They want to test their own boundaries. And so you cue with them and you say, "Okay, what's my cue? If I raise my hand and I ask you for help, then I need your help."
Yeah. Yeah. You're
So, and
working
that's
with them.
actually a real positive kind of action for those students. And I remember the first time I heard a student say that, and she said it, she was really snarky with it. And I thought, you know what? You're right, though. You really are right. And she looked at me and she said, "Are you messing with me?" And I said, "No."
Oh, it's
I said, "You're
true.
right."
Thank you for the lesson.
Yeah. So that brings us to hands on learning. So you have Waldorf, Montessori, democratic, and self directed learning. Those are the four biggest models. They all incorporate hands on learning experiences, which provide opportunities for students to engage in experiential activities, things that allow them to explore their newfound knowledge. And the data and the research has proven that once you learn a skill, playing through play and mimicking and doing things with it provides 8 to 10, I think it's either 50 to 80% more retention
Absolutely.
and better outcomes
Yeah.
of that skill than if you just have repetition
Yep.
with
Yep.
that.
And it becomes even greater if that skill is executed, while trying to reach flow states, that state where you're pushing it, but you're not going to fall or tumble, but you're not bored. You're pushing the boundaries. Your focus is intent. The consequences may be a little high,
Mhm.
and like an experiment where something's going to blow up. That's like, make sure it doesn't really hurt everybody, but when that stuff hits out through the end of the tube and blows everyone up in the air and covers everyone in this gunk, you want to make sure you're safe, that sort of thing. So the
Yeah.
consequence kind of high, and so that gets a lot of memory retention, a lot of retention from the whole thing, and
But
that's
you
what
have
flow state is. Yeah.
you have the project-based learning, you work
Yeah.
with manipulatives, and for a lot of people, manipulatives are huge,
God, I would say
and it
millions of people. Yeah.
and a lot of people think manipulatives are for lower grades. No, they're not. I mean, they work they work for adults. Think about this. Think what's the probably one of the most used manipulatives that is still used today and has been used throughout centuries?
A globe
That's not a manipulative, is
is
it?
in my book. Maybe.
An abacus.
Oh, oh, of course. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah.
Think about that. It's also a fidget, right?
Oh, it is. And that's the interesting thing. Some really intense, incredibly complicated things are fidget toys. For example, I was substituting in a room, and they had this teacher had this camera that projected overlaid contour lines below, and then below it was like flour, sort of a dustless flour, and they moved it around and made mountains and lakes and canyons, and it instantly projected contour lines. And then if you push certain buttons, it would rain on it and show you where the water would collect and where it would flow. And so it projected water and contour lines onto this flower and made it an interactive 3D map.
That is awesome.
The kids ate it up. They
Oh,
couldn't
well,
keep
yeah.
their hands off of it. And just they would talk to each other and go, "Oh, that's a good one." And it was amazing what they learned. And I told them, "Yeah, you understand why those lines are all together when you get higher up toward the peaks." No, well, it's because the closer they are, the steeper the terrain. They go, "Oh, I guess he just got it." So they didn't know much about it. But I told them, "Oh, yeah, this is amazing."
Yeah. Yeah. Because you could also make that into something. Well, because you could get into technical writing. You could also get into the mathematics of the whole
You
thing.
could project where floods would happen. Just make a topo
Right.
and then computer program, certain amounts of rain to come at certain times and see where the water would collect. It's amazing. You could do that easily.
Oh,
In,
definitely.
in high school, in a couple of weeks, you could figure that one out.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Next one is holistic learning. And this is where the model emphasizes the development of students, recognizing the importance of social emotional development, artistic expression, physical well being, and character formation. And all of this goes in connection with cognitive growth. Now, I was thinking on this today, and part of me was wondering if maybe that might be what they are pushing in the classroom since the pandemic to do more of this holistic approach,
Yeah,
which I don't think is possible en masse.
I don't think it is
It would
either.
be, I want you to consider, Philip, because you teach driver's ed, do you not?
I do.
How many students do you have in a cohort?
Two. There's when
Just
I
two?
drive, there's just two students in the car.
No, I mean in a group.
Oh, you mean in a classroom? It's
Yes.
I believe about 30.
Okay, and how many people are actually taking driver's ed at one time?
Two classes, so 60.
Okay. So let's say that you were told you can't just take two anymore.
Hmm.
You have to cram 30 kids into the car. And they're going to practice their driving skills. And you're
Let's.
going to have to teach them. You have the same amount of time. Okay. First of all, it's illegal, right? We know
Oh
that.
yeah.
But, I mean, the Flintstones, they just kind of pop Dino's head up the top. And
Stuffing the beetle is long, long gone.
but if you think about it being almost the same thing, you can't possibly teach that many students at the same time the skills that you're after.
No, no, you can't.
Some of them might get it, but it's lost on all the others. And if you consider that the average classroom is well over 30 students, maybe up to 50 students in some areas, and I'm not talking about alternative ed, I'm talking about the mainstream.
Yeah,
That's almost impossible to do for 90 minutes, 3, 4 times a day, 5 days a week.
I'd say yeah.
So that was just something that kind of wiggled in my mind. Now, when we talk about it with alternative ed, we're not talking about sitting down the students as a group. Maybe we are, but we're looking at how are we building each student, because each student is going to have their own, as I said earlier, individualized learning plan. and we're going to try to work with them. So, Philip, you have high anxiety. So, we're going to work with you on building your self confidence and just working through so that you feel as though you've achieved something and you start to recognize yourself and you recognize just the little achievements and you realize that the people around you are actually rooting for you, but they're just as nervous as you are. So these are the tiny little things. That's part of the character development. That's part of the holistic growth of the student. Am I making sense?
You are.
Okay.
Is there a question?
I don't know. I was waiting to see if you had
Oh,
anything to add.
I
But
have a lot.
okay.
Yeah, I would. My mind was floating over just the fact that it's good to be exposed to emotional knowledge. The emotional knowledge that I have, I had to learn most of it. They didn't. Health class was, strangely enough, sex ed. I mean, it didn't teach a lot about why do you feel funky all the time. You know, what is that voice in your head that that won't shut up? You know, everybody has it. I didn't realize everybody had that, which is commonly known as the monkey mind. But I thought,
Hmm.
what is wrong with me? It didn't actually speak out loud. Things like that. So it's nice to know as a kid, well, you're not abnormal. But as far as packaging psychological help to kids, it's sort of, it seemed a touch contrived, that's for sure. Because I was
Well,
part of that a little bit when I was doing the subbing.
right. But see, teachers aren't therapists.
No, that's what
They're
makes it
also not
relatively hard.
social workers.
No, and that's also true. It's important to be aware of your mental state, but teachers don't teach that real well, generally speaking. Some do. They make that inroad through the relationships if they're a good teacher. And
Mhm.
then they can teach it that way. But as far as I never had, I had outlets by which I could teach. I taught yoga and mindfulness, and we worked with breathing, and I brought in all kinds of stuff. But I had that small venue. If I had like 20 to 30 kids, 5 periods a day, I couldn't get them quiet enough to start to do a yoga class or to breathe. It's it's like herding cats in many ways. There's a
Mhm.
certain critical point. That
Oh,
kind of works
definitely.
best done in a smaller environment.
Right. Which brings us to the next point, which is having respect for the child's learning pace.
And that too, yeah.
So let's say that I'm working with you, Philip, and we're working in a category, in a subject that you're not really, I don't know, you're not really adept with.
Would that be math? that
I don't know.
would be the subject I was never adept at. But go ahead.
But then on the other side of the classroom, there is this other kid who seems to be just plowing through his material or her material or their material, just lickety split. I mean, they are just flying. Now, working with you because you have a few, I don't want to call them neuroses, but you have some challenges. And so I can work with you and then maybe all of a sudden we find ourselves in a rabbit hole, which is not too far off from possible reality. But then it's up to me to figure out how do we use that in order to get to the goals that we're after? Is there a way that I can get you to do some kind of like an archaeological dig on these on this aspect that might actually take us there and get the relevance? And in a sense, you go at it because now there's a newfound interest and you're trying to figure something out.
True.
So, and then I go over and the other student, I ask them for their work and I go over it. And yes, they're very quick. They've been very efficient. They are doing eh, okay. They could do better, but they don't want to do better. So I that's going to be the bigger challenge. How do I encourage them to go back and do their work so that they can do better? And that way they can move on. Except let's say that the little angel, the speedy angel, is looking at trying to graduate by a specific date because there's something major happening in their life. And I am assessing their grades. And let's say that it's on a 5 point scale and I'm giving them threes, and they're a little upset that I'm giving them threes out of five. And I say, well, okay, fine, I can give you a 3.3 out of five or something like that. And so, but they're upset. And it's like, okay, well, go back through it and tweak these things. Then they can do that, because you don't want them to feel as though the diploma that they receive was all for naught, that it was just something stupid that they had to go through some motions in order to get. You want that to be something of an achievement, because it is a diploma of achievement.
Mm-hmm.
And you want to make sure. And so having that facilitator and that mentorship mentality where you are working with the student, they are not working for you, they are working for themselves. You're simply teaching them how to have that independence in order to do the best job that they can to show off what they are capable of doing. So they can take that outside and go further with it.
Sounds fair. I was thinking along the line there, decision to decision. For example, they
Mhm.
got a three and the five is, out of a scale of five and they wanted a better grade. Then, of course, you say, I'll be happy. You need to make some corrections. These would be them.
And that brings us into non traditional assessment. So,
Yeah, that's
so non-traditional methods of assessment may emphasize qualitative evaluations rather than quantitative, portfolio assessments,
yeah, yeah.
observations, feedback, dis- and not just relying solely on standardized tests and grades.
Or
So
point
because
collecting.
here's what's going to happen. If you are mentoring them well, and if you get a good thing going, they should be able to do well on the standardized tests if they have to take them, if they're paying attention. But that depends on whether or not you are able to fill the gaps that many of them have. So let's say that you come to me and you have a third grade math level, you have a fifth grade reading level, and you don't write. You can't write very well at all. That's a big challenge for me. So I need to figure out how to assess that. Now, I'm going to assess you on what you're capable of when you walk through the door and on your progress. So let's say that I get you to start being able to do long division. I can get you to start doing different kinds of math, and then we figure things out because we turn math into a puzzle. And so we figure things out. And so you're learning all your multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, and algebra all at the same time, because we can use manipulatives, we can use puzzles, we can do whatever we want, but we can find and be more creative in the way that we do that. So I can assess on how well you're handling that information, because I can constantly reflect on everything and then come back to it. And you can do the same thing too. So we're working together on this project in a sense of where we want to go. Cabiche?
Project.
Well,
That's what
okay,
needs the
maybe
outcome,
the
but
project
outcome
is there.
based. But yeah,
But we want to look at the progress, we want to look at the development as you go forward. And we don't take this standardized benchmark, because we have special kids, we have our population, and now we're just throwing them back into the morass instead of holding them and working with them, so that, because for many of them that would be a failure.
I never had any problem with the basic standards, the benchmarks per se.
Oh, standards are not a problem.
No,
It's
no,
the
I just had that.
standardized tests.
I had the pro. Yeah, well, and even the tests, the assessment tests, the reading and the writing they were just demonstrations of proficiency to me, and the rest of it was too. They were targets for proficiency.
Hmm.
So I never was threatened by them. The right answer, wrong answer assessments, I think are absurd. I don't think they measure anything but specific knowledge for the most part, and that's really tough to know. It's kind of like, what does the test want you to know, not so much what information should you have. And that's what I didn't
Right.
like about assessments like that. It's like I'm teaching to a test, and that test is telling me that it's kind of like a representation of life.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
actually, the truth is, and all the data proves this, that most of what students learn in high school they forget anyway, and it's not
Yeah,
substantial information that they really need. The skill is what they need.
they do, and they need to learn the processes.
Mhm.
How things work and how they don't work. There may be due dates in the real world. However, it kind of doesn't work on due dates everywhere. So if you're at work and you're working on a project, there's a target date, but it's not like you have to know what that is this week or it's due by Friday.
But those are amenable and they're fungible, so
Some people live on those.
that's why earlier we talked about learning at your own pace.
Exactly, yeah.
So the
Or
student
learning what you can do at your own pace and
right,
for the greater good, not just to get your points so you can get your
and I
grade. Yeah.
right, and I've seen so many students look so frustrated and they say, "I can't possibly get this done." Well, let's give it some more time. "No, I told you this date and I want it done by that date." Well, guess what? We all learn sometimes that we aren't good judges of everything we can do because sometimes we think that we're superheroes and we're not.
That's a good lesson to learn too. If you do it one day at a time, figure out what's going to go on. Don't worry
True.
about a month from now. Just do what you need to do now.
Right. So the next one would be community and collaboration.
Yeah,
Working together on teams, working together on partners. Think about creating some sort of a community because when students walk through our room, we tell them you're getting a fresh start. And we try to get to know everybody else in the room. And if you have an alternative classroom and it's 90 minutes a day, like every other day,
yeah.
I, I, I have no words. I have no words. I commend you for doing that and helping try to make that work. But an alternative classroom should be at least 2 periods a day, if not all day, or maybe even 3, and that way the students can take another class outside, but they can work with you on getting their skills together and getting the credits that maybe they're behind or maybe getting the skills that they need to make up. But if you think about how many times have you done a group project and everybody else bogged on you and you ended up having to do the same thing, having to do it all?
Three.
So in but learning how to work together and share responsibilities. There was a time when there's a roller coaster project. Did you know about this roller coaster project? And when one person does the research, and then you have the engineers and you have the designers, and there's everybody does a different piece of it, and they have to work together in order to bring it together. And so they work collectively, everybody has assigned duties, and then they come together so that they can put the whole structure together. I don't remember what everything is. So everybody is reliant on everybody else, and then you can check on each person. And I had somebody who just couldn't figure that part out, and he said, "I'm not sharing my information with them." I said, "Dude, you're on a team." He said, "I'm doing all the research. They're not doing any research." And I said, "No, but they're doing these pieces." He said, "Well, I'll get to those later." So it you got to make sure that there's a connection
Yep.
up here.
I don't think people understand that.
Right,
There's a
right.
lot of differences between high school and reality. And as soon as we start teaching more reality in the high school level,
So anyway, but just building the community where people can rely on each other and they find, you partner them for other things. It's not necessarily that they are going to have to work together on something, but sometimes when you have 3 people working on the same class, You can have them go in and they can talk to each other about it. And you might want to moderate so that they're not, possibly giving each other
Might.
answers, but, that they're actually working in that, even if they're just playing around, they're still working in that community.
Yeah.
And that's good for them. That's
Well,
good for their
hopefully
social
working in the
emotional
community
state.
is almost like play.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Okay, I'm going to list, because we don't have a whole ton of time, but we're going to look at some of the different philosophies that permeate alternative ed, and those are the programs, the big four. There's
Mm-hmm.
Waldorf education,
Uh,
and that is based on Rudolf Steiner, emphasizes holistic approach to education. We have the Montessori education, where they work on projects and manipulation. There's democratic education, where students are involved in the decision making process, that they might have some student government. They do just a whole lot of different kinds of social skills, and there's conflict resolution. And then some other forms might be the Reggio Emilia, which focuses on project based learning, exploration in the arts. Sudbury School's self directed learning model. There's unschooling, where the student is not in a learning environment, but they direct themselves. So they learn what they want to learn without somebody guiding them necessarily, unless they ask the questions. So let's say that they want to learn more about they go to a creek and they want to learn more about what's in that creek. So they learn about the rocks, about the algae, they learn about the plant life, the whole biome that's there for them. And there's open education, which is flexible learner centered approaches that encourage open access to educational resources, collaboration, and self paced learning. And that would be open educational resources, online learning, and focusing on personalized learning pathways. Okay.
that sounds about right.
Okay. So, what are the underlying philosophy and principles of alternative education? Well, let's start with student centered learning.
Mm-hmm. That's one of
So,
them.
students take ownership. We covered a lot of these. Holistic, we talked about experiential learning.
Yeah, that's important.
So, this is something where if the students have internships, that's an experiential learning environment.
It is. It definitely is.
Mhm.
If
So
they have a job
yes.
that's more than just your average sort of job, like on bussing dishes. We all had it. I don't know how much I learned, but had I had a job, say, with a skilled craftsman or a plumber or an electrician, that's definitely experiential learning.
There you go. Democratic principles. So maybe you want to have democratic principles within the learning environment. And that way the students have a lot more ownership and buy-in to what's going on.
They want a voice.
Yes. And you know, they make the call, they run it by you as the mentor or however you have it all set up, so that they feel that they're on an equal plane and that they can bring issues. They hear issues from other students, they bring them up, and maybe you form your own student council in your environment. And you have the students kind of form their own kind of, I don't know, whatever kind of whatever form of government that they want to have there, whatever
You said
platform.
something about a formal grievance thing. Formal grievance system, that's important. If
Mhm.
someone has a gripe,
Right. And you can set up your restorative justice that way.
true. Although, yeah,
You could do individualized instruction, whatever that looks like. Some people put down the packet. The packets are good if they have a purpose. They have a purpose as
yeah.
long as there's a meaning behind it. Just to toss the kid a packet and say get it done doesn't work.
If it has a purpose, not the purpose.
Right.
If the purpose of that packet is to know history from 1920 to 1939, it's not going to work. It's just, yeah.
Right. And I want to say one thing about online learning. And online learning does detract from building a community
Yeah, it does.
and partnerships because it keeps the kids plugged into the computer and they're not, how do they engage? They have to listen to somebody that they don't even know, bark off a bunch of facts, and then they have to take a whole bunch of notes. In fact, I find that to be completely anathema to the majority of what most kids need in alternative ed. It has its place and its purpose, just like the packets. I mean, there are some students who want that, but then you need to be able to integrate those with maybe some packets, some other kinds of learning, and that way they have a well-rounded experience, but they also need to be able to have a choice.
Two things. You said it earlier. We seem to learn more when we manipulate things, when we work with them and make them
Mhm.
do what they do. And the second thing is when you're online, you could just open up another tab. And when you want to, just click, and pretty soon you're playing your favorite game, which is an
Exactly.
addiction for a lot of kids. They can't handle that. I don't
Mhm.
know, boring guy, one screen, fun game on next, click, fun game. It's just not a hard decision.
Exactly. And then we come to social justice and equity. So we can work with that. If you listen to the interviews with Joe McQueen and his book, we talk a lot about social justice and equity. If you watch the YouTube videos, there's one where we talk about positive peer culture. Just, I think that this gives the students power and it also takes away from the need to have a us versus them mentality, especially when it comes to something like suspensions and expulsions, because it allows the students to have to deal with consequences.
Yeah, it answers the age old question: why is punishment for not coming to school making sure you can't come to school?
Right. I
That's
mean, that makes
okay.
absolutely no sense.
Nobody ever solved that eternal awful riddle.
And the worst part of it is the other, well, not the worst, but one of the other poor parts of it is that they find the families, and usually these are families who can ill afford something like this or to take the time off to go to court.
Right. Yeah, it's
I mean,
definitely a
you want to talk about diversity and inclusion, we're talking about non-diversity and working against diverse groups
complete
and
exclusion.
exclusion.
Exclusion. Yeah, it's like you're out of here, and we're gonna charge you on the way out.
Yeah. So instead of being this resource of community and something that you want the family to feel good about, you have become almost like the central office of the Praetorian Guard. Hey everybody, this is Tony. Thank you so much for watching the video. We've got more coming that go right along with this. So, if you want to know what's next, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, hit that like button because that helps with the algorithm and that's what allows us to do this. So, if you like what you see, share it, subscribe, and join us again when the next videos come. And we do have a catalog growing. So we hope to see more of you. Okay? Thank you.